Hello, everybody. Can you hear me okay? Yes? Okay. So, a bit of housekeeping, right? Yes. So I'm going to focus for the next 30 minutes on the benefits and business opportunities that GDPR compliance may offer, and which is often an afterthought to the discussions on GDPR obligations and operationalization burden or operational burden and financial cost. Now, these discussions and issues and concerns are very real and they're very relevant, of course. And in fact, Ernst & Young, you probably heard that, predict that $7 or $8 billion will be spent by the 500 largest organizations to get to GDPR compliance in the next few years. That's a lot of money. But it's also perhaps time to focus from another perspective, that of the benefits that GDPR investments can bring to your business. So where are we now? We are in year 2 of GDPR, and companies are still working through its business impact. They're also realizing that privacy is here to stay. There were those few who, a couple of years ago, thought that GDPR was a fad, and I don't think anyone thinks that anymore today. Whilst the opportunities of GDPR are crystal clear to GDPR automated solution providers, which are all in the next room, in the room next door, I don't feel that it's still fully obvious to companies what business opportunities can be derived from their GDPR compliance program to retain and attract business and secondly, stay current in a world of AI, machine learning, and robotics. So in other words, are the data scientists systematically restricted by DPOs? And I don't know if there are any data scientists in this room, but if so, they probably know what I mean. Or are they collaborating towards a more efficient and ethical digital world? So before we can answer that question and really, the business opportunities that are ahead of us, hopefully, let's look at some of the teachings in the last 18 months. So companies have been driven by the fear, largely, of massive fines in the last 18 months. And before GDPR took effect, much of the fear was based on speculation. After 25th of May happened, we didn't have Y2K, and Elizabeth Denham did also refer to that, but we did have high-profile cases and the large fines. So I've highlighted a few in chronological order to examine what are the teachings that can be drawn to support strategic approach to GDPR and its opportunities. So we have 4 main cases: Facebook, Cambridge Analytica, you've all heard of this case, Google, BA, Marriott. 3 out of the 4 came from the UK ICO, that's interesting, very active regulator. 1 from the French CNIL, and Germany must have felt a little left out, to be honest. But they've remedied that very recently. I think you've read the news. So we are seeing the large fines, as I was saying. Let's look a little bit deeper at Facebook, Cambridge Analytica. Very briefly on the facts. The ICO reported that Cambridge Analytica had purchased personal information of 87 million Facebook users across the world. Personal information ranging from profiles, Facebook, one-to-one messages, friends of friends, lists, etc. A lot of personal information. And there was a third-party app involved that sold all this personal information, basically. And Cambridge Analytica then used it for political advertising. Now, I'm not really worried about the 500K fine that Facebook received, but it's very interesting, I don't know if you've read it, to see what the FTC order really was about. So in the US, Facebook received a $5 billion fine on the back of this event, let's put it this way. And there were at least 2 key teachings from both the ICO and the FTC orders that I'd like to highlight. So first of all, data controllers, like Facebook, are responsible to monitor the use and deletion of personal information by third-party providers / processors. That's really, really key. It means that data controllers should definitely re-examine their agreements with data processor, but any supplier really, and particularly around audit rights. Here, GDPR is an opportunity to take back control over some supplier behavior that maybe wasn't very fair or balanced, and adopt a supplier strategy where you're going to select those who will agree to adapt to the new world of privacy. And they will have to. So maybe a year or 2 ago, some large suppliers could answer, well, no, we're not going to change our privacy addendum or something like that. This is no longer the case. This is changing. So an opportunity to really differentiate here and put some more pressure on your suppliers. Secondly, the FTC required Facebook to change its corporate structure. That's really, really key because it talks to data governance, and it guides companies in what the world, so to speak, will look like in large companies, but not only, from a data governance standpoint. What does it mean, really? Well, reading that FTC order, we're really seeing what the future will be in that respect. So what does it mean? It means moving privacy controls right into the boardroom, creating independent privacy committees. It means having a structure with accountability at individual level, having multi-channel compliance structure, means all that. And here GDPR provides an opportunity at individual level to engage in roles that are independent or semi-independent. So yeah, that's an opportunity that wasn't there not so long ago, and to also enable employees in the company's digital transformation journey to make a difference. So I can go on, in more detail, but we don't have time to do that today. But one of the things that's interesting is that Facebook declared, on the back of all these scandals, that it would be applying GDPR worldwide. I'm sure you read that. Now, to be honest, they didn't have much of a choice. But what's interesting is that Microsoft and Apple said the same thing, but not at all in the same context. So Apple, for example, is very, very active in business differentiating, and thereby, I think, staying one step ahead of the competition by offering GDPR as a form of premium quality service. So, they did the brainstorming, they spent the time, the hours, etc. They took a bit of a bold decision a few years ago compared to other big data players. And now they're really, I think, reaping the benefits. So their angle is very interesting. If Apple can do it, maybe their vision is something we can emulate. Another high-profile fine is the Google fine on 21st January 2019 by the French CNIL. I don't have time to go into the details, but it's all about ad tech and transparency and what one of our colleagues here was talking about regarding cookies, how you're going to have to ask for prior consent before even dropping your cookies, etc. Google has until next summer to get to compliance. So aside from the 50 million euro fine, what's really important is what they have to do, what they're ordered to do, just like the FTC with Facebook in the US. And they were giving a 6-month grace period, which, funnily enough, was ended up at court because the association that had complained about Google wasn't happy with that grace period. Anyway, what will happen, I think, is that we're going to see higher levels of data protection in ad tech implemented by Google on a global scale. I can't really see Google doing one clean rule, so to speak, in Europe and the crap, in the US. That's not a good marketing message. So I think that Google may, against all odds, end up acting as a benchmark, and that a number of companies may then have the opportunity to differentiate against that benchmark. It'll be a little bit of a race to doing that, probably in the next year. So I will not go into the other bullet points, but you can read that in your own time. The other 2 points I just want to mention as part of the landscape before we, look at the rest is that there's still a lot of companies that don't feel comfortable, according to surveys, with GDPR compliance, like 50%, even more, and even some that think it's not possible. It's an impossible task. And privacy professionals, are finding it much harder. There's not only GDPR, but CCPA, LGPD, the guidelines, the European Data Protection Board, the supervisor, the local regulator. So it is very complex, but I think that while we are still going through, a process and getting more comfortable, we will see the opportunities. We will start by identifying them. It's just the timing is still, not quite there. Another key fact is the rise in the awareness by individuals on their rights. So the European Data Protection Board published a report. I don't know if you've seen it, but on the 1-year GDPR anniversary, the chief regulator reported that, I don't know how they came to that conclusion actually, but that 20%, that there was a 20% increase in the awareness by individuals of their rights. So from hang on a second, look at my notes. Yeah, from 38% in 2015 to 58% in 2018. And this is just going to grow. So the business opportunity here is to develop new ways of communicating with the data subject. Data subject, reminder, is your consumer. And so looking at DSARs and personalization from that slightly different perspective, like maybe privacy as a service, type interaction. So a few key takeaways. Privacy compliance is a top business priority. It's not the only one, of course, but it is a top priority. Privacy programs need to be agile and be able to be evolving in ever-evolving digital society. And in due course, sooner rather than later, hopefully, be creative and set your own vision of GDPR, your own religion. So the work has only begun, in my view. So talking about being creative and open to opportunities, it's quite important to, at this period of time, while we're brainstorming on the next AI generation and ML and all that, to brainstorm also on the data governance and privacy impact approach that companies are going to take at the same time as all these new technologies are emerging and really starting their journeys. So one of the main fundamental shifts we are experiencing as a result of GDPR is in that privacy impact approach for business development. So what does it mean? Well, it results, for one, from the accountability principle. You've probably all heard about the principle of accountability and demonstrating compliance under GDPR. In practical terms, it means being able to say very clearly, with a lot of confidence, what your data processing are, why you have data processing, how you are doing your data processing, so to speak, and how much of it, and also to prove everything you're saying. So that's the documenting part. And for a privacy impact approach to be effective, it needs to first be embedded into a purposeful accountability structure. So very clear definitions of roles and responsibilities across the organization, a meaningful data governance structure. That's the Facebook Cambridge Analytica teachings, but you find it in many other cases, and of course on regulators' website. Data governance holds the key to GDPR compliance. That's really the first effort. It's a massive effort, actually, when you think about it, that companies need to expand. So you have your structure, your framework, your committees, etc. Next, as I said, the focus is on proactively managing privacy impact. And that's where the sort of creativity, as I call it, you can call it different terms, comes in. Because it's the opportunity for businesses to set its own justifiable vision of privacy and of its impact, and therefore how privacy will be operationalized. So it's about company determining its own privacy risks, standing, by this list of risks, determining its acceptable risk position, why it considers it's an acceptable risk position, and justifying it, why, it's an acceptable. So it's really not just about applying ABC because Article X said of GDPR or CCP. It's really, remembering that GDPR is a risk-based legislation, and most data protection laws are. So it's making it your own, having that space to really think with various stakeholders, data management committees and data governance and the execs and the board and the audit, really brainstorming about what's our acceptable risk position and how are we going to, if we have to, justify it with a regulator, wherever that regulator sits. In terms of business development, I think that one of the key objectives is to redefine a company's purposes understood under the GDPR meaning. So what are the purposes you're pursuing for data use? And particularly when we're looking at secondary data use or secondary purposes, ad tech, monetization, personalization, really being very, very clear about the purposes that you're using the data for and everything that goes with it, of course. If your business development relies on secondary personal information use or secondary purposes that no one knows about, this is no longer viable. Well, certainly in the mid to long term. So, it's quite important to know that. So, in terms of the business benefits that privacy impact approach provides, I mean, there's quite a lot, but I'm just going to highlight a few. It enables a company to streamline their data collection and processing to its core utility and purposes, as I've just said. Do you really need anything else? It enables a company to sanitize their personal information, residence or storage strategies and data transfer, cross-border data flows strategies. Look at it from a more holistic position. Of course, to get your clients to think you're great and that you're providing security and protection everywhere in the world. It helps address data quality, validity, integrity, accuracy. This leads to a higher value in your data, of course. It's not to be underestimated, and it's real. It improves your data management, more efficiency. It supports pseudonymization and anonymization. These two security solutions, we're talking about them a lot at the moment. We're not doing that much. But in the next 1 year to 5 years, we're going to see a lot more true anonymization or pseudonymization techniques. Of course, it helps identify the source of risk, the threats, likelihood of threats to prevent cyber attacks, and it leads to new ways of interacting with the data subject. And that's what we're going to talk about now. So the 3 key takeaways, I will let you read that in your own time. I don't know if the slides will be shared, but if they are, then I'll just pass on. Right. So partnering with the data subject is really one of the key, I think, endeavors that companies need to really think about. It's really another fundamental shift as a result of GDPR. And what it really means, we talk about DSARs, but really what it is the data subject's renewed or newly found decision-making power as a result of the transparency and prior consent principles. So on the one hand, the individual is given the right to say yes or no to data use. Now, of course, not in all cases, we know this. There's a number of cases where data subject is not going to be asked yes or no. But in a vast majority of cases involving secondary users or data personalization and monetization, ad tech, all that, you need a yes or no. And that contributes to reallocating the decision-making power between the individual and the large organization. And we're seeing in parallel the use of internet itself be transformed with a more direct participative model. So the internet user is no longer just reading and browsing through internet pages. It is actively commenting and blogging and deciding to participate, to whatever is on that net. And this shift may really reshape existing business models. I think it will, around data monetization and ad tech. And it'll be very interesting, again, as I said, to see what Google does next. On the other hand, we're seeing individuals are given the right to assert their position against very large organizations through DSARs, etc. That's akin an audit right, individual audit right. It's a little bit the same, really. So data subjects are changing their behaviors across the globe, not only in Europe, in the UK, but in the States and, in everywhere, in the Philippines. I don't know if any one of you answers DSARs, but I follow that on a global scale. I can tell you we receive DSARs from everywhere around the globe. So individuals are less and less shy about objecting to this and that. And why? Because they're encouraged to do that. The regulators are hammering that message into individuals and the media and this and that. So, of course they will be changing their behaviors once they realize more things. And the current backdrop is really distrust, or a lot of distrust, in the way companies use individual personal information. So bearing in mind all this, and while companies are probably still on reactive mode, adopting a renewed way of communicating with the data subject, who remains the company's most important person, if you are in a B2C or even in a B2B environment, may reconcile the consumer with the data subject and vice versa. So actively making the consumer the decision maker, in instances where it makes sense, where prior consent, for example, is required, may flip the stakes probably, but not in a negative manner. It's about rebuilding trust and confidence. It's really about empowering your consumer, who probably thinks still now that there's nothing they can really do about it. So they're like more victims or passive, people than really an active consumer who's happy to be provided this on the basis of what they share. So this is what I think this participative model, if that makes any sense, or participation model, should really be a focus for companies in the years ahead. And the choice, finally, cannot be reduced to a binary offering between a trustworthy and compliant service and this great, funky, super intelligent service, but not respecting privacy rights. So you have to find this messaging, this PR and marketing messaging where you're offering a clean, great service to individuals. That is possible, and Apple is certainly leading the way. The saying goes that you went to bed as a services or manufacturing company and woke up as a data company, and that data is the new gold or the new oil. And in fact, data is probably more valuable than gold and oil in some cases. So I think now is probably the right time for every company to look at leveraging the personal data they hold, but doing it, but stop seeing GDPR as getting in the way of that wish, strategy, goal, and really starting to see GDPR as helping companies along the way. And that will be, I think, one of the keys for long-term digital corporate success. Thank you. I'm done with my presentation. We have 3 minutes left.